Okay, we should be good, Matt.
All right, thanks. All right, guys. So the main things, as I set out in the agenda, that I think we want to work through are where we're at on design guidelines for duplexes, and other, a few other. Jim, can you mute yourself? I think we're hearing a lot of background noise from your end, Jim. Maybe. Alice is raising her hand. Is that a confession?
Yeah, I was just asking if we could tell everybody to mute because I'm having a hard time hearing.
Yeah, done. So duplexes and design guidelines, and then some ancillary issues about the duplex and triplex topic, and then cottage courts. So on the subject of duplexes, I think we've already agreed to recommend legalizing them in the smaller parcel single-family zones, RS 5, 8, and 15. We had talked a little bit about the small number of lots that have a lot of frontage, particularly corner lots, but I suppose there are other supersized lots that might have 2 or 3 times the required frontage in their zone. And we had talked a little bit about perhaps recommending legalizing triplexes or even fourplexes on those parcels. Does anyone have strong feelings one way or the other? In particular, strong feelings that we should not do that, because corner lots provide easier access, and it becomes a lot easier, I think, to do a triplex that still looks like a single family home. Yeah, Jeff.
I think that that's a good idea, especially on corner lots or extra large lots. I'm not opposed to it. I think we should approach each issue of duplex, triplex, quad as a separate thing, or I feel like a quadruplex is going to be a hard sell in any neighborhood, just because a duplex is going to be a hard sell in any neighborhood. So I think it's certainly worth considering, but there should be extra space or extra room if you're going to figure on extra units, and I'm not quite sure what the formula would be. But certainly, like with a corner lot, you can, if it's legal to cut 2 driveways onto a property, is that a problem, Robin or Mark? I don't know if that's an issue, but if you're on a corner, you could cut one side in, the other side in, and sort of split it apart, make it look more separate. And maybe a quadruplex looks like 2 duplexes, but when you get to the issue of design, I'll probably have something to say about that too.
Okay. Yeah, and I think we'll probably have a lot more to talk about design, but I just wanted to sort of take the temperature on this question of should we recommend triplexes on corner lots. Alice, and then Sarah.
This will slightly punt. I'm not comfortable recommending them. I'm comfortable recommending exploring that idea. I think that's a much more palatable approach to it. I mean, we all know there are plenty of opportunities where quad would go very elegantly into we can think of corners in all of our neighborhoods where that would work. But let's not do too much in recommending allowing. Recommending allowing duplexes, I'm very comfortable with, with some further discussion about design standards, et cetera. But that's recommending that's a bridge too far for me right now.
Okay, Sarah.
Just responding to your, wanting to take temperature, I'm definitely in favor of that. And I think that it is all politics. It is timing and, sort of palatability of, how many recommendations we can jam into something. But one thought would be kind of building on what Alice said, which I think makes sense, is that, if we wanted to we talked last time about sort of asking to be able to continue, that would be a really good example of, is that, I don't know if it falls, I don't know kind of the format that our recommendations are going to take, if it's going to be a couple different memos or what that's going to look like. But, there could be a section that is like, we want to continue, we want to look at these things specifically. that we are generally in favor of the notion of triplexes and fourplexes on particular types of lots, and would like to be able to investigate that further.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm speaking out of turn a little bit, but I think procedurally that makes a lot of sense. Sort of dovetails with what I was saying. We can certainly ask that this be sent back to our committee for further review. We can talk about the research that we've done briefly and explain that we think there are a lot of opportunities here. People are dropping off, so I must be.
We can see, I can see and hear you.
Okay, so I'm still here, but yeah, I mostly see y'all's initials, but that's all. I mean, I think that asking that this committee be allowed to continue as a subcommittee looking into that specific issue is something I'm completely willing to sign off on.
Okay, great. Jeff.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's what I was trying to say that was not so succinct. We should say that we think this is an idea worth exploring.
Okay, that all sounds reasonable, and it sounds like there's consensus on that point. Just recommending duplexes and recommending that the mayor and commission, if they're so inclined, kick it back to us to maybe recommend triplexes. And it may be that they'll feel more comfortable looking at triplexes after a couple of years of duplexes when the sky has not fallen. And some nice looking duplexes have been built and neighbors can see that. Maybe the triplexes will be more politically palatable at that stage. So, okay, that all sounds good. Then, Mark, you had said in our last meeting that legalizing duplexes is maybe just as simple as changing the use table, but with the caveat that a design guidelines provision would have to be written if that's the direction we want to go in. Is that correct so far? Because if so, I think all we need to talk about now is design guidelines.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just suggesting that design guidelines it really would be just as easy as just changing the use table and having them. But I think it would be a good thing to put with them. So I think that may have just been me filling in some thoughts there. But yeah, technically it would just be as easy as amending the use table.
So would you require something like that to adhere, like a new use, but that has the design guideline requirement? Does that kick it into sort of a special use thing, or no? Like would it just have some sort of asterisk or some, the way that we see in the use code, like an L1, 2, 3, would that particular new cell in the table have something that then makes reference to duplex design guidelines, or how would that look?
No, it would be code. So the way the design standards for single family houses, in fact, we have a chapter, I'm sure you guys are somewhat familiar with 925, which is the design standards chapter. So 925.8 is the design standards. 925.8b is the single family ones. And so it just mentions in there where it applies to. And then 925.8 C, D, E, and F are the design standards for commercial projects. So yeah, I mean, and all those things just say, P permitted in the table. And then the applicant is expected to, look through the code and know that those other code sections apply. It's mentioned on our, applications. It's mentioned in like the plans review handbook and places like that. So it would just be another section in 925, I think.
That makes sense.
Okay. And as far as design guidelines go, Mark had sent us a couple of examples. There's the Jonesboro one and the Orlando one. And I think, Mark, you had originally said that you thought maybe the Orlando one was kind of the best organized one, and sort of comprehensive, straightforward. Do you want to say a little bit about the pros and cons of that particular one?
Yeah, I mean, I just think like some of the other stuff, keeping this simple is going to make it more successful. The design standards for single family homes are pretty simple. The work you all put into ADUs is very comprehensive, but the output is actually a fairly simple set of recommendations in code language. So I just think, and maybe that's just where I'm seeing it from our code, but that seems to be what has worked in Athens-Clarke County. Some of them got a little bit, hairier, I think, or had more information. So that's about all I saw out of them. I didn't get a very thorough look through all of them, though. I will honestly admit.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I liked the Orlando one. It says there's an appearance review process, and I wondered if maybe we can talk about if that. Let me say a little more on that. But then, if that seems like a process that could work with the way we're set up in Athens-Clarke County, so that it says duplex and tandem development standards to ensure that each duplex and tandem dwelling is harmonious. And if you're looking at it, I'm on page 9 of the City of Orlando document. Is harmonious and architecturally compatible with existing residential structures in the surrounding neighborhood. An appearance review is required. A number of factors will contribute to a successful appearance review, including, and then has a paragraph on each of these 3 topics: variety in design, compatibility with the neighborhood, and architectural style. And then there's just a short paragraph on each of those things that's, pretty thoughtfully written, that I think will give the developer a pretty clear sense of what they need to do to get through an appearance review process successfully. And then the next page of the Orlando thing has the wonderful title, Anti-Monotony Standards, which just says you can't have identical front elevations. If you do a duplex, the 2 sides can't look exactly the same. And you can't just do a simple reverse configuration of the same mirror image, so you've got to have different facade elevations, different roofline configurations, and at least 4 of the following architectural elements that are different. And then it lists, a dozen different things. So I looking back at it this morning in preparation for this meeting, I thought, something like that seems like it could work and work really well, both to ensure that ugly duplexes don't get built and to very clearly communicate, as the mayor and commission are considering this, and as there's public input and neighbors considering whether this concerns them or not. Like, I think it presents a pretty clear, package of that I think would be reassuring to a lot of people. So what do we think about an appearance review process? Like, who that would go to? Is that purely an administrative thing, which I think it is in Orlando, or would it be a hearings board?
I definitely want to hear staff's response to that first, and I'm also interested in how they're staffed in Orlando to deal with that kind of traffic.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just trying to figure that out. I was looking through Orlando stuff there. And it's probably worth a phone call to him tomorrow. So administratively, we just don't really have this for the plans review process in terms of things being laid out very explicitly, which they seem to be fairly well in that Orlando one. That's part of it. And as I've mentioned, and I think Robin's mentioned, dealing with this as a single family plans review, which is this process we keep claiming is going to happen. We hired a new planner 2 last Friday, and I believe one of her responsibilities is going to be that. So if that process is in place, I could see it being part of a single family plans review process.
That's great. I didn't know that you guys for that, but yeah, that does. I think it's vastly preferable if it can be done as part of a plans review process with very clear criteria, as opposed to going to the hearings board every time.
Yeah, I think that's the idea. Robin, do you know further? That used to be your old role. I don't know if you heard anything more than I kind of heard that in passing. So.
as far as like single family plans review goes. So that's going to be at least a little while, because I know the original intent was that we were going to go to like neighboring communities or communities that had a single family plans review to talk like with them about that process and implementing it, which probably isn't going to happen for a little while with current circumstances, especially as Sam getting acclimated to her role. So I'm not sure where that lands in terms of horizon, but I wouldn't guess near-ish future.
Okay. Alice.
Thank you. Yeah, the the idea of single family plans review literally dates back to when I was on the commission, and I left the commission in January of 2013. So we've got a progressive mayor and commission. I know they can get it done, but I'm just giving you a little bit of time frame there. I guess we're talking plans review, which is, as Matt suggests, that's this is where you would want this to happen. You don't want someone to have to go to the hearings board every time or do a type 2 every time they want to put a duplex in a single family neighborhood. The term that Orlando uses of appearance review grates a little hard on my ears, because I know that our staff is trained and hired to do very technical review. So I don't want to overstep what our staff, who certainly have a lot of aesthetic ability, but what they're actually trained and hired to do. It does seem with these kinds of design standards that really ultimately are construction standards. I as a citizen would feel comfortable with that, with this being a plans review issue, not an appearance review, but a plans review. But that's why I keep throwing it back to you guys. How does staff feel about playing this role? And I hear you saying that if you could get a single family plans review process, you feel pretty good about it.
Sarah.
Yeah, I agree with what Alice is saying, and I guess it's funny, when I first looked at the Jonesboro document and the Orlando one, your initial thought is, yeah, you always want to do what you can do in 2 pages, and the Orlando one's longer, but the Orlando one is how it should be. This is how sort of proactive planning that encourages certain housing typologies should be. Because not only does this serve to sort of educate the person who wants to build it or the developer, but it also educates and sort of alleviates concerns of neighbors that I think we could anticipate with adding, this as a duplex as a possibility. So I guess my thought that I would sort of add to the conversation is that I suspect that the staff in our planning department got into planning because they're more interested in doing stuff like this. And to me, and I can't speak for you guys, obviously, but it's just my guess. And that if our planning department doesn't currently sort of have the capacity to do this, I don't think it's a matter of skill capacity. I think it's a matter of sort of priorities, time, resources. And if they, one way for this kind of thing to happen is for us as a committee and a commission to push for it. And because no, I don't think staff should have to design a 25-page document, but I do think that this kind of thing, it's come up a few times, this notion of a document that serves to educate both the consumer or the user, as well as the getting ahead of potential concerns of people that are, might be kind of a little more NIMBY about this. So I would just say that, I love, obviously keeping this away from hearings board and planning commission would be the goal. I agree with like that terminology of appearance review grates a little bit, makes people think about historic preservation commission, which we don't want to do. And we want it to be more of a plans review. Like, we are enabling this, we're encouraging this, we're, providing guidelines for this. So, I think this would be, I don't want our committee to recommend the idea of adding duplexes in without something like this. And it's even, I think, worth considering whether, I don't know what comes first, the chicken or the egg. Like, I don't even think, if I were a member of the public who would raise my eyebrows when I saw that duplexes are being allowed, and if this document or something like that didn't exist at that time, I think I would be particularly concerned. Whereas if something like this, even if it's a starter, sort of a 3 or 4 page sort of, this is where we're going with this, went as a way to sort of educate people. And, there's some people who are going to hate it either way, but I think generally speaking, this makes it so much more palatable. So I think it's an opportunity for us to push for the kind of work that I think our planning staff can and should be doing. So I'll leave it at that.
Jeff.
Just to pile on, I think that's an excellent idea that if we are going to say we want duplexes, we need to say we want duplexes, but we want them to not necessarily look like the duplex I lived in on Timothy Road or a duplex on Cedar Shoals. We want them to look like individual units. And so, there needs to be some design standard. I think plans review is if we're having single family plans review, then this is simply a multifamily plans review or a 2-family plans review or whatever you want to call it. But it is important to sell it with that aspect of it. I'm concerned that objectivity can slide into subjectivity. I haven't had much of it. This is the end of my fiscal year. I have not had a chance to, other than skim any of the stuff you sent out. So I don't know the details, but having a menu list of things to do rather than, well, it just can't, it can't do this or it can't do that, but rather here's what you can do and here's the way you access that. And then it's a simple matter for staff to go, okay, they walk in with a checklist, they look at the plans, they'll go, yes, this is this, and that's that, and that's the difference, and make a check mark, and off they go. So I think that's probably the correct way to approach it, is to make it as easy for staff as possible. I appreciate staff willing to take it on, but let's not beat them up too much. They work hard enough as it is, I hear. So but and to make it easy for the developer too. He's not going to have to, there won't be any question when he walks into that room that he has, yes, I have followed these instructions. I have chosen one from column A and one from column B, and off we go. And there's little room for argument, I guess. I assume that the Planning Commission would be the appeals process for that in any. There should be an appeals process, and maybe we're bringing it on ourselves. But I think it is important, as Sarah and Alice said, that this whole package needs to be rolled up in one and sent forward as a process, so that we have the idea and we have the reason to sell it. Yes, we're doing this to you, but this is why it's not a bad thing.
Yeah, I agree with everything that everyone said. I particularly would not want to support duplexes without some kind of review like this, because I don't think it would be successful. And I don't think, you see some of the stuff developers put up, and you do need to sort of ensure that they have some aesthetic review process and a clear set of standards. So this all sounds good. It sounds like we're all on the same page, unless Jim has strong feelings to the contrary. And the more I thought about it, like Sarah, the more I thought this Orlando document really does seem like a nice model. And my thinking on this was that for present purposes, we probably just want to express the thoughts we've just expressed in the memo to the mayor and commission, and attach maybe the Orlando document as an exhibit and just say, like, here's an example of the kind of thing that we envision for this plans review process. And if they love it and want to just adopt it wholesale, great. If they want to send it back to us to do some more refinement, that's fine too, but I don't think we need to, nor do I think it's necessarily appropriate at this stage for us to concoct our own detailed, design review process until we get some indication from the mayor and commission that they want to do this and they want us to do more work on the specifics of the design review process. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. There one question I had though. I was thinking about Alice talking about the length of time that it's been since single family design review has been brought up as an idea. If we attach this notion of design review to that, are we hitching our cart to the wrong horse? That's a pretty slow moving horse. Like, do we want it to just be its own thing?
Oh, that's a really good point. I see Alice has her hand raised, so you go first.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. Sarah's actually reading my mind, but not entirely reading my mind, because I feel like this is an opportunity for us to say this can happen. It can really happen well in the context of single family plans review. And we know that the government has been, putting this in place. Apparently there is a planner hired. We don't want to, spread planning department gossip if that's what that is. But anyway, we know that the mayor and commission have been interested in single family plans review for some time. This would be a really good opportunity to leverage that resource, because we really can get duplexes into single family neighborhoods in really attractive ways. We just need a good, robust single family plan review process.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think I would just add that if they're not ready to adopt I think it's important to say, this could be done as part of an adoption of a single family plans review, or it could be done as a standalone if they're not there yet on single family plans review, or if that's going to take a year to implement. This could happen immediately and independently of single family plans.
Totally agree. I just think it is an opportunity for us to elevate this idea again. Yeah. Because it looks like there's some things in the pipeline, and maybe we just kind of remind people, oh yeah, we've been meaning to do this for a while, and this is a good opportunity to make it happen.
Okay. Yeah. Great point. Mark. Yeah.
Yeah, let me just clarify one thing. It's not gossip for you guys to say any of this, by the way. I just want to let you guys know exactly how it's worked. We had 2 openings in the department of former positions. A new position was not created. Robin moved into a position that was vacated a few months ago, and someone else is filling Robin's job. It's just always kind of been this thought that the position Robin used to be in, that Samantha's now in, will become the single family plans review planner. So if you mention it, it's not gossip, but just so you know, it's a filling of a position we had, not a new position.
Got it. Okay. All right. Well, that all sounds good. And I hear what you're saying, Alice, about just kind of teeing up the single family plans review thing, putting it on their radar, that maybe they just want to go ahead and pull the trigger on that at the same time that they're doing this, if they're ready, but also that it could go on its own. Robin, yeah.
I just want to pose a question that maybe this has already been addressed, but when we say like duplex is allowed in R5, 8, and 15, does that mean that if someone is to split apart like a massive 40-acre parcel and create a subdivision, they can do that and just do all duplexes? Or have we talked about differentiating those standards at all?
Oh, that's a great point. And one that I don't think I had thought about. What do y'all think? Is that, it doesn't strike me as troubling to do that. If somebody were to develop a 15-acre parcel into a bunch of RS8 that was zoned RS8 or RS15, into a bunch of lovely looking duplexes that were designed for individual ownership, that could very well be a quite nice looking development. So does anyone have any hesitancy about that, or think we should maybe say this applies to existing parcels and not to subdivisions of larger parcels that may happen in the future? Jeff?
I don't think it's fair to say that. it's I'm not sure how I feel about are there any 40-acre parcels available in RS5 or RS8? Then maybe so. It's if it makes the housing more affordable, and certainly the neighbors will feel better about a duplex next door if they themselves are in a duplex, and if the duplex are designed such that they are differentiated, and maybe that's part of it. If you're doing a subdivision, you've got to apply more differentiation. You just can't have the same two different units glued together all the way through the place. So that's something to consider, but I'm not. It seems simple to me. It's not multifamily if each one is individually owned on its individual piece of property. They just have a common wall, and if that makes it more affordable, then why not?
Is that the case? Are we imagining duplexes that are essentially condos that have separate ownership on either side of the firewall? Because I'm imagining duplexes that are owned, have a single owner that maybe rents both halves of it.
I think it, as a legal matter right now, it could be either. If they're not, I mean, a duplex could exist on a single parcel where there's not a property line on the common wall. And so, of course, yes, it could be owned by an individual who lives in one side and rents out the other, or I suppose rents out both. But at the same time, Bruce informed me when we were on that tour of 5 Points, looking at duplexes and stuff and garage apartments, that there's nothing in the Athens Code that prevents anyone from condoing any existing parcel. So certainly an existing duplex or a new duplex on a single parcel, they could set up a condo association with two members and each own half of the property as it stands right now without any legal change. So I was actually in on that conversation, so I remember that, and thank you for reminding me of it.
Okay, so but getting back to the other question of that Robin raised, I do have some concerns about that kind of scenario. The kind of development that you described, Matt, sounds lovely and would be great. But I also worry about over density of duplexes in a single family neighborhood being pretty disruptive of so when I picture kind of my ideal duplex ordinance, eventually maybe it's kind of like what we do with personal care homes. You can only have a couple along a block, or maybe one on each corner and maybe two mid-block, or something like that. So I am concerned about the creating dense duplex neighborhoods in the middle of traditionally single-family neighborhoods. That sounds a little less gentle than I'd like. So I want to put an asterisk on that.
Okay. Yeah, and actually, your point that it could be limited to a percentage, in a new subdivision of greater than 4 lots, no more than 25% of the lots can have a duplex on them, or something like that. I'm making up numbers, but yeah, that would be one way to do it, so that it still has a predominantly single family feel. And of course, duplexes that get filled in 5 Points and Cobham and Boulevard and elsewhere, there's never going to be more than 10% duplexes on any block, just because there are existing houses that aren't likely to be torn down, right? So in a way, that having a limitation like that on new large subdivisions just makes the eventual result more consistent with the eventual result in existing neighborhoods.
I agree, and I think that if Mark or Robin provided us with a map of where those existing large acre parcels are, we could see some potential inequities in the kind of housing that we're trying to create. I think we would be putting large duplex neighborhoods in places where that are least able to sustain them.
Okay, Jeff.
Yeah. First of all, the duplex that we looked at on South Lumpkin at Carlton Terrace is actually on two separate lots. So the property line goes through the middle. So there's one in a neighborhood that is separate. I don't disagree that you could put a limit on the percentage of duplexes in a neighborhood. That may not be a bad idea, and maybe they have to be scattered. It's not the duplex section and the single house section. Something else that we talked about before that I'm not sure if you're going to get to is lot size. Are we going to require a larger than minimum lot size in a zoning in order to put a duplex on it, or can you put a duplex on a 5,000 square foot lot in RS5? Is that something we've got to yet? And that may be part of the answer to this is, yeah, you can get duplexes in your 40-acre plot, but you can't cram them in on top of each other. You have to put slightly larger lots in order to spread them out. So,
yeah, I think the answer to your question is that our discussions to date, I think, presuppose that the idea is you can do it on any lot, even one that's right at the minimum at 5,000 or 8,000 square feet. There are, in other places that I've lived, and I'm sure several of you, there's a lot of 3,000 square foot lots with single family homes on them and 4,000 square foot lots with duplexes on them. And so there's nothing about a 5,000 square foot lot that makes it difficult to do a duplex, assuming it doesn't have unusual dimensions. So yeah, I think that's the answer to your question, at least as I understand it. The other thing that just occurred to me is maybe the answer on larger subdivisions is that this question should be answered by our inclusionary zoning proposal, right? That maybe what we're doing here should be limited to existing parcels of record, and any developer who's trying to do 10 acres or 20 acres or whatever that's currently RS8 or RS15 or 5 would have the opportunity to qualify to do duplexes on a certain number of parcels in exchange for making a certain number of the units affordable.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that did answer my question. Thank you. And that's probably a good approach to solving or finding the balance between 40 acres of duplexes and 40 acres in RS5 that wants to be developed as something more than single family. So, yeah.
Jim.
Okay, well, I think you have to allow duplexes on a 5,000 square foot lot if you are willing to allow ADUs on a 5,000 square foot lot, because could be in some ways viewed as similar to a duplex in function. So I think you'd be discriminating against one type of property in favor of another, and that's always a problem.
Okay, and that actually raises a question that had occurred to me earlier, which is, I think when we talk about duplexes, we're generally talking about something with a common wall, a structure attached to one another. Is that necessarily the case? Or if somebody wanted to do, maybe they have a narrow lot that's very deep and they wanted to do a front house and a back house, but keep it on one parcel. Is that, are we defining duplexes as attached, or is there also, just like with ADUs, such a thing as a detached duplex for the purposes of this proposal? Jeff, and then Alex.
I don't know the correct answer, but that's never stopped me. I see that as a subordinate house, an ADU to the primary house. So when I think of a duplex, I think of an attached dwelling. So if you're going to have one and then the other, then that becomes, I think then you have to go to the ADU model to figure out how you're going to do that.
Okay. Alice.
Jeff just basically said what I was going to say. I think a duplex is attached. Detached dwellings, one needs to be subordinate to the other.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And I can certainly imagine neighborhood concerns that suddenly people are just going to build equally big or larger houses in the backyard, and then effectively we're doubling the density. And so that may be a reason.
Right. I mean, you can create your own flag lot.
Right. So that may be a good reason to shy away from going there. Sarah, were you? Yeah.
I think when somebody mentioned earlier something about limiting the number of duplexes on a block, like to a certain percentage, I think we probably would need to consult with the county attorney about something like that. I don't think it's going to be a big problem, kind of for the reason you mentioned before, Matt, which is that, it's not like in some of these established neighborhoods, people are going to start tearing down houses and building duplexes at a rapid rate. But I just, I guess I would, until we know a little bit more. I don't like the idea. I guess that's all I really want to say. I don't really like the idea of limiting how many duplexes can be built on a block, because I think people will say that is in some way not fair, possibly even illegal, to apply that, to allow some property owners, not others. But I have no idea. I just think it's worth looking into.
Yeah, that's a great point. When I raised that idea a minute ago, it was, I may not have expressed this well, but it was intended as, if we're dividing up a 15-acre parcel, not to limit it in Cobham, where I live, in 5 points, where not to say, once 10% of the people on a block have done it, nobody else can do it. And do you have the same concern about doing it for new subdivisions, or is your hesitancy and desire to talk to the attorney more about established neighborhoods?
It was more about established neighborhoods, but I've been sitting here looking at the subdivision regulations chapter of our code, because I realized as we were talking that I don't understand it very well. And I just don't know. So the subdivision regulations apply to only to single family, right? They're for subdividing single family lots. Is that right? Or I guess somebody they could subdivide something that allows residential and create. Anyway, that doesn't matter. Let's just move on. I will figure it out. I don't want us to talk about this and not get to cottage courts. So
you can technically have a commercial subdivision. It was done up Highway 29 by Space Kroger there most recently.
Okay.
But yeah, generally speaking, 926 applies to residential subdivision.
Okay.
All right. Are we ready, Jeff?
I just wanted to say, Sarah put a thought in my mind that is there any incentive for a developer to buy a string of lots on a street or on a block and tear all the single family houses down and put duplexes up? And is that a bad thing? Is that something we need to think about before we go forward with this? I don't know where that would happen, where property would be cheap enough that you could tear down what's already there and put a duplex up, but
put twice as many people on it, so maybe there are plenty of places.
Yeah, well,
might have a lot of historic district applications pop up.
So that's just something that I think of as like, well, wait a minute, should we? I would maybe we make a note that says we don't want that to happen, or do we want that to happen?
Alice, yeah.
Yeah, I think that what we're kind of getting at is our desire to not transform single family neighborhoods into duplex neighborhoods. Our desire to preserve the character of the duplexes. We're imagining duplexes as being part of the single family feel, right? Structures look the same. Maybe there's an extra car or two parked there, but it's used in the same way that single family is, and it just fits into the fabric of the single family neighborhood. So I think that's what we're grappling with here when we start to deal with a question like the one that Robin just asked. And my view is that I would like to take this slowly and carefully and incorporate duplexes into single family neighborhoods at a I hate, I guess I'm an incrementalist at heart, a slow but incremental rate. I continue to be worried about the bigger lots and the possibility that Jeff just raised, and I think he wants to talk, and I'll yield the floor in just a second, Jeff. There are still some vulnerable in-town neighborhoods where developers could do just that, buy a bunch of lots across the entire block and turn it into a duplex sector.
Would it be fair to limit it to currently undeveloped lots somehow, maybe, or lots where a house is determined to be unsalvageable? Then you could add the duplex, but you can't tear it down. And here I go being subjective after I just argued against it. Is this house too derelict to let stand? And so, yes, you can tear that down and put a duplex up, but this house is still repairable. I don't know what that is, but you can certainly say if there's not already a structure on the lot, then yes, you can put a duplex there. Is there already a structure there? Then no, you can't. I don't know how much that helps. That you'd have to count the vacant properties in these zones, but that might be one way to approach that, where we don't go, we take the incremental approach.
Even for an incrementalist like me, that's too incremental. That seems too restrictive. There are plenty of.
I'm trying to strike a balance here.
Yeah, I agree. And let me just say for the record that if you guys heard screaming in the background, that's my dog's reaction when the phone rings. She hates the sound of the phone, and it sounds like somebody sort of, it's halfway between a whine and a screech. I promise you, nobody is being abused in my household. It's just a dog with the answering machine. Yeah, I agree with Alice that strikes me as maybe too incremental. I mean, certainly this is an issue I think we want to be sensitive to. And so maybe what we ought to do is just flag it for the mayor and commission that the idea here is not to facilitate wholesale demolition of existing single family homes and replacement with duplexes. And that whether by, if it's legal, limiting it to a certain number of parcels or, through some other means, discouraging that, that's our recommendation. I suppose another way to discourage it would be to limit the square footage of units in a duplex, right? Because if no developer's going to tear down a 2,500 square foot house to put up two duplexes if they were capped at 1,800 square feet or something, because probably the value of the single family home might be higher. So there are different ways that they could skin that cat. And maybe the answer is just for our purposes at this point, just include our concerns about this and a few words on ways to consider it or address it if they're concerned about it too. And that may be the best we can do at this point.
Limitation on the number of bedrooms, maybe, or size, or something. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Robin, when you mentioned East Athens, what parts are you thinking of in particular?
I'm just thinking of like all of the new development along like Strickland and sort of that northeast where all those houses are being.
That's what I was thinking too.
Cool.
Yeah, and a lot of that is zone single family, isn't it? Because one of that risk that we've been talking about is far greater, I think, in the RM1 neighborhoods where we already have a problem with developers tearing down relatively decrepit, naturally affordable, very small houses, and then putting up a 3-bedroom house, which they're allowed to do no matter how small the parcel is under our current code. And because it's zoned RM, they're able to rent that house to students. And so allowing duplexes in multifamily zones on any old lot, without a density restriction would definitely be problematic. We don't currently have a density restriction for single family, but maybe for duplexes, one way to avoid the demolition thing is just to, as Jeff said, say, duplex units cannot exceed 3 bedrooms, or and it's single family, so you're not going to have the student housing problem. Developers tearing stuff down to put up student housing, because at least for now, the family ordinance continues to complicate their life if they wanted to pursue that approach. Okay, so I've got a note here to just flag this issue about avoiding incentivizing wholesale demolition and possible approaches. So with all that, are we ready to talk about cottage courts, our other major topic? I think I have plenty to work with to get you guys a memo in a few days with all the stuff that we've talked about on duplexes. And we can always tweak it still further. So on the subject of cottage courts, I gather we're already at the point where we think they seem like a great idea for certain lots. We're already getting applications on the Planning Commission to be allowed to do them. And one way to make it more likely to happen on appropriate lots would be to allow people to do it as of right if they meet certain criteria. And so the first two questions I had about that are just, are we talking the same three zones, RS5, RS8, RS15? And secondly, what minimum lot size would we want to target for this? Because obviously this is not like duplexes, something that you want to see on a 5,000 square foot lot, or I think even that you could conceivably do on a 5,000 square foot lot, given that it's cottages facing a center courtyard, and just, even if you've got cottages that are only 20 feet, long, the courtyard, if there's going to be a 20-foot courtyard, you're already at 60 feet, not counting setbacks on the side property lines, not counting a driveway. So it seems to me you probably need to have 80 or 100 feet of width for this to even be a possibility. So what do y'all think? What zones and what do we want to say about minimum lot sizes? Jeff?
I don't know what zones, but I certainly think that a minimum width or a minimum depth is absolutely necessary. And I'm not sure 100 feet is enough, just because of all the things that you mentioned. You want enough room in the middle, you want enough room for a reasonable size structure, and you need a setback. And in general, I guess we require a driveway for fire access. Does there have to be access from the front of the cottage court to the back for fire department? And I know that's been the sticking point on a lot of the ones that we've seen. So there needs to be room for that. But
yeah,
other than that, I'm not sure that, I'm not as concerned about zoning necessarily, because in RS5, probably, if you've got a 15-acre lot, again, you can make a cottage court is probably more attractive to the neighbors than a field of duplexes. So that's my opinion. That's my thoughts.
Let me just say, answer one question you asked on the fire thing. The Lehigh Valley document that I sent around specifically addresses that, and it says every part of every building on the parcel has to be within 100 feet of the street. 150 feet of the street. And that's something that I was going to ask Mark and Robin, if if we have a rule, if the fire department here, the fire marshal has a specific number of feet that they require for fire access, because that's one way to handle that. Is just say, if it's 150, you don't have to provide an access drive if you're within the appropriate number of feet of the street, which just depends on how long the hoses are on the trucks, I guess. Do you guys know what our rule is on that? If there is one?
Yeah, I don't know what that they're. Go ahead, Jim.
To make a point about minimum lot size that is acceptable for court. Obviously, you can't fit a cottage court onto a single RS5 lot, but that doesn't mean you couldn't build it on RS5 lots if you can accumulate more than one side by side. So I wouldn't want to rule that possibility out, but I would want to set it up in a way that they just wouldn't fit on a single lot. And given that our need for enough room for a cottage court RS8 and RS15 are sort of okay, but I think you might even have to consider the possibility of opening up to RS25 because that's a size that you could really start to have enough room on. Probably would be RS40.
I'm sure it would be resisted in RS25 and RS40. But that's a good point. Mark, what were you going to say about the fire access?
Yeah, I was just saying that there must be some distance. I know we got into it with 230 Finley there with the access with that structured parking. And I know it came up in the Dublin one. So let me try and look into that a little bit more, and I'll let you guys know.
Okay. The other thing I was going to say in terms of lot dimensions is just that the missing middle housing webinar and book and all that mentions that the ideal lot for a cottage court is 100 feet wide and at least 115 feet deep. And
Did you say 100 feet wide?
Yes, exactly. And they say you can certainly do it on a 80 or 90 foot lot, but it just restricts the dimensions of the ground floor, the footprint of the dwelling. So 100 feet is kind of the sweet spot, which puts you at about a quarter acre. 100 feet by 115 is 11,500 square feet, which is just a hair over a quarter acre lot. Alice.
So sorry to have to do a basic review of our the lot sizes, but I just got up and looked out my window and I was counting 5 houses. Would that roughly be 100 feet wide in my zone? Or are our lots about 25 feet across?
No, they're about 50 or bigger.
Okay, so just 2 of them. 2 of them would yield 100 feet across.
Right.
And these cottage courts, we're talking about dwellings that are maybe 25 to 30 feet deep and 18 to 25 wide. They're cottages. They're quite petite, and so they're going to be much smaller than your neighbor's houses. It's not like just your neighbor's houses to turn sideways.
Yeah, I understand how the design works. I'm just thinking about what it looks like from the street. What street frontage does it occupy? And so basically in an RS15 zone like I live in now, essentially 2 house fronts.
I think that's exactly right. Yeah, basically a double lot would suffice. And in RS15, there may be some lots that are 80 or 90 feet wide. It may be possible to do it on some single lots that exist there now. But yeah, if they're at the minimum, I think our minimum street frontage requirement in RS8 is 60 feet. But that doesn't mean there aren't a lot of lots that are 50 feet that already exist.
Yeah, it's 50 feet in RS5 and 75 feet in RS15.
The minimum.
But that doesn't mean there aren't a lot that are less than 75 feet, especially in older neighborhoods like mine.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, I don't think there's a single conforming lot in my area that is all RS15. Nobody has 75.
My old neighborhood too.
Yeah, exactly. Those lots, they're just narrow and deep generally, unless you're a corner, but yeah.
Yeah. And really, if we were to decide, as I was thinking about it, it struck me that width is really the limiting factor because we do have a lot of neighborhoods with quite deep lots. And if you don't have a deep lot, that just means your cottage court is 4 cottages instead of 6 cottages or 4 instead of 8. So depth controls how many structures can be put on the parcel. But width is really the limiting factor that is sort of, you can do a cottage court or you can't. And we could just set it at 100 feet, which Daniel Paralek says is the ideal. Or we could, set it a little smaller than that, but have some. Yeah.
Does he say that is the ideal width, or does he say that's the ideal minimum?
He says the ideal lot for a cottage court is around 100 feet wide and over 115 deep, with an area between roughly a quarter acre and a half acre. And the reason I think he's thinking of no bigger than a half acre is then you start to get beyond 12 cottages, which starts to seem like a
Right.
whole neighborhood as opposed to just one little court.
And kind of getting at what Alice mentioned earlier, which I think is good to keep in mind, is the idea is the sort of gentle density. So if you happen to own 200 feet of frontage and want to build a massive cottage court, then you're not doing the thing that we're trying to do, which is the sort of reasonable scale.
Yeah, and so
or even if we limited the
go ahead. Sorry, Alice.
I was just going to say, or even if we limited the lot width but allowed two side by side, then you've got, we don't want that scenario either, I don't think.
I like the idea of minimums, or not of minimums, but or whatever. I like the idea of setting parameters.
A cap on, yeah, and several of the ordinances we've looked at just cap the number of cottages. They say a cottage court is defined as having between 4 and 12 cottages facing an interior common space on a lot, of at least this dimension. If you limit it to 12 cottages, then or even less. I mean, we've seen some ordinances, I think, that it's to 9. If 12 seems like an awful lot in some of our existing neighborhoods, maybe it does. Jeff, what were you going to say?
Well, I was going to suggest a limit to the number of units. It may be helpful to go back and look at the applications we received in the last few years and find out what numbers people are looking at, and also look at the lot sizes that they're trying to put them on. And that may be a guide for certainly what developers think is feasible. So I would recommend that maybe getting a little bit of historic information and using that as a guide for what we do. But I think an upper limit makes sense, and I think a minimum lot width and maybe a maximum, maybe not. But the maximum number of units, you wouldn't want to waste the property if you couldn't fill it full of units. So.
Yeah, just so you guys know, the one on Millard was just over 2 acres, if I remember, and the one over off Dublin was over 3 acres. So, and those were somewhere between 9 and 14 units, something like that. The one over on Dublin's a little bit bigger. The one on Millard's a funky shape, and I think only had 9-ish. The one on Dublin, I want to say, has over 12 units in it, and it's over 3 acres.
Yeah. So, if somebody's doing a 3 acre parcel and wants to try to squeeze in, 20 units, that seems easily doable in RS5, just as, even with 5,000 square feet for every cottage. So that doesn't seem overly dense. But I think I suppose if we set a limit of it can't be more than 12 units, people are going to just, if they have a 3 acre parcel, they're going to do an 1.5 acre cottage court, and then they're going to want to do another 1.5 acre cottage court next door. And maybe that's okay for that kind of parcel. This is not going to go in on Millage Terrace or Rutherford or, in an established neighborhood. Nobody's going to be building dozens and dozens of cottages. But if somebody's got 3 acres or 8 acres or something that's in a nice developable area, maybe we ought to encourage that. So what I'm hearing is RS5, RS8, RS15. We all think that, those 3 zones at least. Jim says maybe even RS25. Does anyone have strong feelings for or against Jim's idea of extending it to RS25?
Is the concern about RS25 that the opposition to that would be greater because of the expectations of people who live in that kind of zoning classification? Yeah. I mean, it does seem like kind of back to the spirit of incrementalism to stick with those, I'm trying to envision RS5 working, but I guess if if we are going to talk about sort of the range of units, then if it's, you know, between 4 and 12 or whatever we decide to do, then 4 units of that scale would work on an RS5 lot. So
least
because
one of the
you're also
proposals-
going to come up on impervious surface coverage stuff too. So there'll be some things that will limit that.
If I remember correctly, the Ashland proposal said that 3 was the minimum.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's right. And that seems fine if that's the size, you know, lot that someone has. They want to do it in a U shape, so you have 2 facing each other and 1 at the back of the parcel. I guess that could look quite nice. So yeah, I'm personally, it strikes me that Jim's right that RS25 lots would lend themselves to this approach, but also incrementalism, maybe we ought to not go there now, and it can always be expanded to that down the road. Jeff.
I'm trying to remember what the original proposal was for the property at the corner of Rock Springs and Springdale. There was that came to us with something that probably wasn't quite a cottage court, but it was much more density, and that's RS15, I believe. Does anybody remember that one? But we came to the conclusion that for whatever reason it was too dense, and they said we absolutely can't afford to do anything but this. And of course, as soon as we said no, they went back and did something that was less dense, and it turned out apparently fine. But I guess that's the flip side of a cottage court. I'm trying to remember, it wasn't quite a cottage court, but that would have probably been the solution if that had been available at that time. And so that's not really sure where I'm going with that, but that's sort of the evil side of cottage courts, or the evil side of almost cottage courts. So yeah, do we have to say exactly what a cottage court is, or?
Yeah, actually, let me say one thing on that, Jeff. I'm sorry, go ahead, Alice.
Sorry, I was jumping in like we were sitting around a table. Yeah, so Jeff, I think that's a good example to bring up, and I do remember it well. It was not a cottage court, and it is entirely possible that the neighborhood would have tolerated something more cottage court-like. What was being offered were, you know, basically 3, 4, 5 bedroom houses. I don't know if they went up to 5. Mark and Robin can correct me, but you know, there were single family homes and just a lot more on the parcel than they could do by right, and they ended up developing it by right. And I mean, it's fine. It's could have been a whole lot better. But I think the neighborhood's concerned that these would become student housing. This would become student housing could have been assuaged if the housing type were different, and cottage courts offer that maybe different, not student-y housing type.
Yeah, I was going to say that I used to live on Rutherford, very close to that parcel, and so I followed it with interest, although I was not on the planning commission at the time. And that was exactly it. The neighborhood was concerned about it being developed as, you know, fairly dense student housing, and, you know, 3 stories tall and so on. And actually that parcel would have been I think a beautiful cottage court. One of the things that defines a cottage court is a square footage limitation on the house, which is one of the cottages, which is one of the next things we have to talk about. And we've seen ordinances where it's 1,000. We've seen ordinances where it goes as high as, I think, 1,200. But these are very, you know, you can get a 3-bedroom cottage, and that's maybe about as big as you can get. Maybe you could squeeze in 4, but they're small little. I think it'd be hard to squeeze in 4 into 1,000 square feet. And you know, on that particular parcel, it would have been just ideal for a cottage court. You've got Stanton Street dead ending into that parcel, you know, so you could have very easily had a central drive right up the middle, you know, to get in, and it had street frontage on 2 streets, and so it would have been very easy to orient, you know, a bunch of cottages around a central green, and so on. I'm not, you know, whether Jared York, who I think was the developer, would have wanted to do 1,200 square foot cottages as opposed to $600,000 houses, which is what he ended up building there. Who knows? But yeah, no, I think that's a good parcel to think about. And when I think about cottage courts, I think about places like that, like those rare infill opportunities. You know, and I think it would be a really nice thing on something like that. So, what about the parameters of the cottages themselves? Some of the ordinances that we've seen not only limit the square footage to, say, 1,200 square feet per cottage, but also require that a certain percentage of the cottages be below 800 square feet. I think what one of the ordinances that that either Mark or I had sent around did that. It said, you know, half of the cottages or 2/3 of the cottages have to be under 800 square feet. You know, because the idea is we're trying to create affordable housing here, and a very efficiently built 800 square foot cottage can, you know, be 2 bedrooms plus a little office or something like that, which can work for a lot of people, and be built considerably more cheaply than a big house. So what do you guys think about the degree to which we want to limit square footage? Jeff?
I think that's an okay idea. I wonder if we needed to limit that, but that's not a bad idea. I would also think about limiting height. I don't think a 2-story cottage is appropriate in a place like that. So, you know, 1.5 stories, you know, a second floor that's gables or something would be all right. So I think those two things kind of go hand in hand. Limiting the size, you know, an 800 square foot 2-story house would be an odd thing indeed. But I think all that is probably should be on the table for consideration.
Yeah.
I think it's important to consider the fact that putting too much of a limitation on square footage is going to discourage some people in considering a cottage court. Basically, very young families that don't have kids, or maybe older families that don't have kids. But I can see restricting them to not being too big, but I think 800 feet is making it kind of small. Although I can tell you that you can in a 1.5 story footprint that could have 3 bedrooms or more. Because the house I grew up in was 670, but some of our neighbors had attics, which they converted into living space, and they were over 800 square feet. And they fit on lots that were 33 feet wide. No problem at all.
Alice?
Just to remind everyone, our minimum house size right now is 800 square feet in Athens-Clarke County.
That's too low. That's too high a limit.
It's 600 in RS5 and RM, and then all of the other RS and AR are 1,000.
Okay, so 600 and then 1,000. Yeah. So I actually like the idea of having a maximum square footage. I mean, they call them cottage courts for a reason. What that number is, I'm not sure what it is. But I also agree with Jeff that you know, design standards that restrict it to a story and a half sounds right too. So yeah, I think the cottage court needs to mean something in terms of how sizes are not going to be. That's why that Jared York proposal over at the corner of Rock Springs and Springdale was not acceptable to the neighborhood because he was building big old houses.
Yeah. Sarah?
I guess when I just looking at the documents you sent and other stuff about cottage courts, all of those code or all of the sort of case studies, the code has language associated with it that talks about the spirit of a cottage court, what that's for. I see cottage court as more than a housing typology. And so I think the sort of cooperative nature of living is really important to that. I mean, you know, there was that one, I don't remember, I think the Lehigh document that I can't remember, I think it was Kirkland, Washington or Langley, that one of the criticisms, they still like supported it, but one of their criticisms, they expected there to be, oh, it was like Birkenstocks and balloons or something, but that they were still supportive. Like, and I think that that is something that needs to sort of accompany this. And then in thinking about sort of who wants to live in that way, like I like the idea of setting a maximum square footage for the cottages, but I'm kind of interested in maybe it being something between like 800 and 1,000 square feet, something like that, and 1.5 stories. Like that makes sense to me because actually young families do, I don't have any data on this. I'm just assuming it's there. I think that young families do want to live in this way. And so I think that the house can't be so small that you wouldn't, you know, a family willing to live in a small footprint, you know, who's willing to live in a small footprint, but doesn't want to live in a tiny house, but wants to live sort of in this more community way. So I think I like the idea of thinking of them as cottages and setting a standard or a sort of size limitations based on that, but also having some language in there about the intent.
I had the impression that the cottage courts that were done on or proposed on Dublin and the other street were bigger than 1,000 square feet. Does anybody remember exactly
It
how
seems
much?
like they were more like 1,200 or something. I don't know. That's the
One thing
Set it below that, you're going to really inhibit the number of people willing to develop such a thing.
let me, one piece of data. I looked back at the Athens infill housing pre-approved plans for historic districts that we've talked about before, that are, I think, date back to the late 90s. And the 3-bedroom pre-approved to build in a historic district and infill comes in at 1,190. It's 1.5 stories and it's 1,190 square feet. And it's a 3-bedroom house that's quite lovely. It's got a good, thoughtful floor plan. It's got room for laundry and, you know, bathroom downstairs, bathroom upstairs. So it's a very livable house, I think, for not just a small family, but for any family, right? So it's got like room to grow. It can be somebody's starter home, but also with 3 bedrooms, you can have room even if you know, the family gets larger. And the 4-bedroom infill was 1,295 square feet. So so if our idea of a cottage is that it's a 1.5 story building with maybe as much as 3 bedrooms, although Jim's right, you know, back in the day, they built very small houses and squeezed a lot of bedrooms into them. I think, you know, maybe 1,200 is kind of the upper limit. And we could also do something where 50%, if it's more than 4 cottages, like half the units have to be under 1,000 or half the, you know, something like that, have sort of, not, they can't all be 1,200, but cap it at 1,200 and maybe half the units need to be 1,000 or less or 900 or less or something. So you actually do get a mix. You get some 2-bedroom houses and some 3-bedroom houses and so on. Jeff.
I think that will be more self-limiting because it'll be limited by how much area you have on the piece of property to start with. The developers will have to scrunch them so that they'll fit. So I don't think that you need to be quite so restrictive. It will happen automatically.
Unless it doesn't, right? Developers may use the cottage court and take advantage of it and still build 1,700 square foot homes if allowed, because the prices of those are just going to be significantly higher, and it's actually more expensive to build small than to build fairly large, just because you start having to cram things together. You know, so I'm not so sure about that, Jim. But Jeff, your hand was up.
If it's self-limiting, then there's no harm in going ahead and limiting it. But what I was going to say is, let's not forget those older folks who have an empty nest and are about ready to just give away all their crap and move into less space. And there are times to me when an 800 square foot house sounds really attractive, or even Jim's 663 square foot house. So yeah, and that helps. You know, we are supposedly a great destination for retirees. This gives them a place where they don't have so much stuff. The kids won't come back and move in with them and stuff like that. So keep all those things in mind when we're talking about room for young families to move in and grow, that it's also us old geezers too.
Plenty of hotels here in Athens, right, Jeff?
Yeah, Sarah.
That reminds me of a question I had earlier. Matt, I think you said that one of the examples showed a cottagecore ordinance that required a certain number to be smaller. What was it you said? So did they say why? What there was that kind of getting at creating affordability by design, like making sure, or yeah.
That's exactly what it was. Yeah,
Okay.
it's you know that they thought that developers might think they would make more money on per square foot on a 1,000 square foot or 1,200 square foot than on an 800 square foot house, and so you sort of had to. It was the trade-off. You know, they can get more cottages on a lot, but in exchange, some of them have to be small so that they're intentionally undesirable to people with money, in a sense, right? And so they become much more affordable for people with one income or what have you.
Right. Okay.
So do you guys, does 1,200 seem right if coupled with a required percentage of smaller units? Like, does something of the cap is 1,200 and half the units have to be under 1,000 or something like that? Different numbers maybe, but does something like that sound right?
Can I just say I'm happy. We're ultimately we're not going to be the ones that pick the number, but that sounds like a really good number to recommend.
Okay, great. Does everyone else, Jeff, thumbs up? Thank you. Sound good. Okay. Let's see. And I may, in the same way that we're attaching the Orlando thing, I may select a couple of exhibits to attach to our memo for people who have time to read them, the Mayor and Commission if they have time, just to kind of look at the best practices as recommended by Opticos in that National Association of Home Builders report and stuff like that to kind of get more of an idea of what it's about. And I agree with you completely, Sarah, about this language about the spirit of a cottage court as being kind of an important part of it, and that should guide some of the spatial planning. Like there needs to be a common area that's large enough to use, that's inviting and so on, and it's not used for parking, and that's sort of a communal yard and so on.
One of the ordinances we looked at had like a certain number of square feet of open space per unit.
Yeah.
I think that was, I don't remember. I looked at too many in too short of a time.
I know, me too.
Square feet of open space per unit, something like that.
Right, I remember that, and that seems like a good detail to include because to make these happen allowable by right, we do need to set forth more restrictions, more parameters that to ensure they get built the way that we envision them. So, certain number of square feet per unit in open space. There's also many of the ordinances seem to have a limit, like the open space can't have any dimensions smaller than 20 feet, which seems sensible. I suppose people could apply for a variance if they had a 18-foot strip of land or something, but that does seem sensible to make it a usable space. Does everyone feel okay about that kind of restriction? Okay, Jeff, your hand's up.
I think that makes perfect sense. That it should be a space that feels open, not just is open, but feels open. So certainly 20 feet is not that harsh. I wonder if there could be a requirement for some sort of amenity, even if it's a bench or a thing, a fountain, a statue of Athena or whatever, just so that it feels like a mini public space.
Sure. Yeah. Right. Some kind of amenity like a fire pit or a fountain or whatever. Yeah. Yeah. That seems smart.
We already have good requirements in our code for outdoor spaces, plazas, and such. So that could be just.
Yeah, yeah. And you want to.
Although I would like to put a plug in for every single cottage court needs to have a statue of Athena in the middle of it.
You want to encourage everybody to it is a cottage court. The spirit of the cottage court is to encourage everybody to gather as neighbors, and what better way than to come out and wave to Athena every morning?
How do you I don't remember seeing this in any of the case studies we looked at, but how do you prevent these from becoming like creepy little gated communities? Like, do you say no gate?
No gate for starters.
Yeah, yeah, that would be a good one. pretty straightforward. I just am sort of imagining some weird behavior I see.
Sort of
people in my neighborhood.
Yeah,
so I see that happening.
Yeah,
sort of. By definition, they're inward facing.
Yeah,
so,
it's a little. I wonder if there's something about that could be just to make sure they aren't these little. I don't know. I mean,
can you maybe not block the public space from the street with a structure?
Yeah, right.
Does that focus it back out to the street?
The plans that we looked at did, houses face the street. The little street went in through the middle, and you could not gate it. You couldn't gate the common area from the rest of the neighborhood. But obviously, that would be an important thing to make sure we codify.
Yeah, maybe it could just be that the open space has to be adjacent to the street and open to the street. Yeah.
Is it open to the public? I mean, it's still a private space, just like this yard out here in front of me. You don't want it to be too public. I think that's still something that could be discussed. You want it to feel like a community, but you don't want to isolate your community from the larger community. So I see there's that trick that you have to work there.
I've seen one or two where I thought I saw this, maybe I made it up in my head, discusses porches, about having porches facing the courtyard, but you could also have porches required to face a street, or I thought I saw one that had, not to throw another wrench into this, but allowing duplexes where the duplexes have entrances facing multiple sides. So you could look at some design standards like that to keep them focused around the courtyard, but also outwardly looking like they're part of the neighborhood as well, if that makes some sense.
That does, yes. So maybe the two that are closest to the street need to have sort of a double front or a wraparound porch, so that they appear to face the street, but also face the courtyard. Yeah, that makes good sense, I think. Some of the ordinances require private space for each unit, a couple hundred square feet of private yard, which could be fenced by the owners or something like that, in addition to the public space. And some of them don't. And I don't really have strong feelings on what's the right vibe. Does anyone?
I was thinking about when I looked at the reasons that I wouldn't live in something on some of the pictures that I saw, it was because I have a dog. And so I was thinking about that, like if you needed to have fence space, but it might just be, maybe that's something that could be left up to the developer depending on what, who they're marketing this to.
Yeah, certainly private space would make it more attractive on the market. And so if the conditions of the lot enable them to have a small fenced area or fenceable area for the dog owners, that seems like it would be an amenity that the market would reward. And so developers would do it whether we told them to or not. Yeah.
If the developer has a lot that has extra room left over after he's subtracted his minimum size dwellings and everything else and his minimum public area, then I think that the private space should be on the not opposite the common area, and this gets down really into the nitty-gritty details, but I'm ambivalent to the idea. If you're living in a cottage community, you're not living there for the sense of privacy, and so you don't want a 6-foot solid fence around your little private backyard. I wouldn't think, but I could show you where I live, but I don't have neighbors. But I don't think it's a thing to require necessarily. I think it's certainly a thing to permit. There's no reason to say no, but I'm not really. I wouldn't feel like insisting on that.
Okay. Thumbs up from Alice. That feels right to me. Don't require it. Do permit it. If the parcel makes it doable, developers are probably going to tend to do that. What are some of these ordinances have some language about the parking, to the effect that the parking should be screened from the street, either period or screened from the street to the extent feasible or something, should be located toward the back of the lot generally. And that certainly makes it the other way to do it. If the lot's wide enough, you could have parking behind each cottage if the drive goes up the side, at least on one side. But then as neighbors walk by on the street, they're seeing a lot of cars parked there, and it looks more like apartments than like a cottage court. And so that might make it fit in less well. And so I'm sympathetic to the idea of requiring the parking to be screened from the street, whether by landscaping or fencing or putting it at the back or whatever. What do you guys think?
Jim, you're muted.
You're muted, Jim.
Let me find the key here.
We can hear you now.
You're good. Yep.
Some of the ordinances actually required that there be at least one parking spot on the street for each unit, in addition to that behind the units.
That's going to be tough with 100-foot frontage.
Yeah, well, they also specified that it had within 200 feet of the dwelling, so it's doable.
Yeah,
But then you start.
I suppose we also need to, we have existing parking standards that if these are 3-bedroom houses, they're going to have to, or 2-bedroom houses, that they would have to have 2 spots per unit, right, Mark and Robin, unless we change that. And that's obviously an extreme limiting factor, and it seems like the best practices among the cottage court pioneers of the world is to reduce that somewhat, like reduce it to maybe 1 spot for units of 800 square feet or less, and 1.5 spots per unit for units up to 1,200 square feet, and maybe some guest spaces, maybe not. What do you guys think about that? Part of what we're trying to get away from is driving up the expense by requiring more parking than necessary.
You might take a look at the multifamily on smaller ones, studios and 1-bedrooms less. So just a thought there.
Okay, Jeff.
I would certainly be a fan of less required parking. And I know that if you don't have enough parking, you drive it out onto the street throughout the neighborhood, and that's a problem for the neighbors. But if you're within 1,000 feet of a bus stop or something like that, and maybe this comes back to our incentives for developers. If you're doing a cottage court that's within X feet of a bus line or a bus stop, then you can require less parking. I think parking should be screened to some extent, and that's the aesthetic me trying to preserve the vision, to make it look like a neighborhood. It shouldn't look like a a house with it shouldn't look like a frat house. It shouldn't look like a house with a parking lot. So
Right.
landscape screening is enough. A few trees, a few bushes, and just to soften it a little bit. You'll never see it, but I would love to find a way to require less than one parking place per bedroom, and guest parking is a problem, and that's something that should be considered. But I would lean towards a lower standard than what you might have ordinarily. So if we can figure out how to do that, some of these are questions that we're not going to answer before the end comes.
That's right. But you know, and given the different demographics of this, you've got very young families who might only have one car. You have the people like Jeff who are trying to get rid of all their stuff and downsize, who might be downsizing to one car, and this is intended to be affordable housing for families who can perhaps only afford one car. So I think the normal requirement, it would clearly be too much. You know, and it's just a question of to what extent we want to reduce it.
Has like 6 cars and 4 half cars at his house, just for the record. Last time I was
Only
out there.
5 now. One of them got totaled, so we're down to 5 cars now in a barn full of parts.
One quick thing, just in terms of the commercial parking standards, there's some commercial parking screening standards we could look at, which are pretty simple. You know, 36-inch hedges and things like that. So I think that's a great idea.
Good. Okay, I like that.
This is not totally related to parking, but I do think that page 29 of the NAHB book that you sent to us, Matt, is a good thing. Now that we've had this conversation, kind of a good thing to look at again. It's touching on some of these things. I was just looking at it to see if they explicitly talk about parking, and the only couple of things that they say in relation to parking is this is under their list that is design considerations and best practices. They say first that attached garages should be integrated into the design of each cottage to maintain the small scale and appearance. I don't think they're saying you have to have attached garages, but I think if you do, that they should be integrated. And then the other thing they say that relates a little bit to parking is when the rear lot line is adjacent to an alley or with a medium to large rear setback, consider allowing the rearmost cottage to be I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong one. Where'd it go? Oh, yeah. Okay. A setback between the rear of each cottage and the side or rear property line of the large lot is helpful for utilities and trash location. So it has, you know, there's that piece of things too. Whether they're putting that in their code, I don't know. But I'm thinking about sort of both, you know, when it comes to that sort of services as well as transportation, you're thinking of parking cars for residents and visitors, and then also utility access. And then we'll get the questions answered about fire that we were talking about earlier. But it seems like some of the models the drawings that we looked at, a couple of them had sort of grouping of the houses around a court and then an alley on each side. And that alley had sort of, I don't know what you call that kind of parking. More or less parallel parking. But the only thing that's a little bit strange about that is that suddenly then the neighbors on each side are looking at a row of parked cars that would go, that are going deep into the lot. Like if you're doing alleys like that. So the parking question is, that's kind of a tough one.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of cities have alleys behind many of the houses, like mid-block, and Athens at some point had some of those in some neighborhoods, like my neighborhood, but then deeded them back, I think, to the property owners adjacent. So when they're talking about alleys, I take it that they mean that, like sort of behind the parcel, between the parcel and the next parcel, rather than like a side drive up from the street. But yeah, like encouraging the parking to be near the rear, requiring it to be screened, all seem like important ideas to integrate it with the neighborhood and make it seem not like an apartment complex, make it seem more single family oriented. I guess that raises your comment about services made me think about garbage. Like, are there going to be 12 big green cans and 12 big blue cans out at the curb on Thursday morning? Or are they going to get dumpsters, which certainly the neighbors aren't going to like hearing trucks come to pick up dumpsters? I didn't see much in the documents we read that had restrictions on that. Do we have something in the code now, that limits when somebody can do a dumpster, Mark and Robin?
Almost everyone tries to avoid them if they can keep their proposed trash amount lower. Even commercial projects do. So I think it's actually the opposite. But yeah, okay. I don't think I don't think there's any definition on how much. I would expect these folks to have roll carts.
Okay. And that's surely going to be what the neighbors would want. Jeff?
Can they share a roll cart? Maybe that's something that's obviously much more complicated than outside zoning. But I think that if you're in a small house, you're a small family, you don't need a 60-gallon trash can. So, and I live in a neighborhood that has garbage trucks 4 days a week. So it's 7 o'clock in the morning for reference.
I have a multi-hour rant on roll carts if you want to get into it some evening. I don't know why everyone doesn't just split it with their neighbor and pay half the amount and save the time for the solid waste department, but that's a different story.
I'm a self-hauler for just that reason.
Am I right, Mark, in understanding that it's the solid waste policy that we cannot do that? We cannot share roll carts?
If you're in the Athens service district, you have to sign up for garbage service.
And you can't share roll carts. Like if you have two parcels, like we live in a single family home, but there's a duplex, an old carriage house that was converted to a duplex on our property. And so that's two different apartments rented to two different sets of people, and they each have their own garbage can. And we have our own garbage cans. On my parcel, we have 3 blue and 3 green cans, and it drives me nuts. And the impression I've been given is that that's just solid waste policy. They won't let, even the duplex, they won't let them share. And if I'm wrong about that, I'm going to be really excited to hear it.
No, that's my understanding. That's how they get money. So
I'm sure you can share them, but you still have to pay for each one.
Exactly.
Right. Okay, there's one other issue that I had flagged, and I know we're a little bit over time, so let me just ask the question. And if people feel like we can't talk about this right now because of time limits, that's fine. Individual ownership, or keep it as a single parcel with sort of a condo orientation for ownership. Do we want to the missing middle housing book people say it's better to allow both, maybe encourage one or the other if we have a preference, but not require either setup. And I think for lending purposes, it may be a little bit easier for people to get a mortgage on a non-condo situation where they own their own parcel, even if their parcel is only, the size of their footprint plus a few feet, and the rest is sort of owned by the HOA. What's the background law on this in Athens, Mark and Robin? Is there any reason why a developer would not be allowed to do either or?
The two that came through the planning commission just had the property lines kind of going through the common space and the roadway. I think they would hold to something similar to that, but I don't know officially.
Okay. Jeff and then Sarah.
Does there still not have to be an organization when the common driveway needs paving? Everybody has to pay for the share that's on their property or something. I think that makes it, in a way, an HOA sort of makes it, somebody to own and maintain the common property makes it a little simpler, and they can assess people as it goes through. I don't really have a strong opinion one way or the other, which would be more ideal, but I can see complication in me owning a piece of the road and a piece of the common area in the middle if there's not some arrangement for it all to be maintained together to the same standard.
Yeah, and I think just to be clear about my question, there's either an HOA, or if it's owned in condominium format, there's a condo association that is responsible for maintaining and owns the common areas. So people either just own from the walls in if it's a condo, or they own a parcel if this is split up into 4 to 12 parcels. I'm sorry, Sarah, you were next.
Did you want to finish?
I was just going to say that then the effective difference comes down to which one makes each individual unit more affordable and more easier to get a loan on. So
yeah, that's actually what I was going to say, is that I think once the regulatory piece of this is sorted out, that the biggest barrier will be the market and sort of the economics of these developments. So I would go, especially with, if that's what the missing middle housing folks recommend, is to be, sort of open-minded about that. And I think that makes sense, because let the developer figure out what's going to work for their financing scheme.
Okay, that sounds right. Any other
I
thoughts
think
on that?
right. Either way, there'll be some sort of provision made for the common space. So,
Right.
yeah.
Right. So everyone will be paying $50 a month or whatever, so the lawn gets mowed and the trees get trimmed, so on.
Whether it's a condo association or an HOA, because everything's individually owned. And then the lot, maybe like when Mark was saying earlier about that the lot lines of, that there might just be something about the piece of property or the way they want to do it where it makes more sense for it to be a condo setup. So I think either way would be fine.
Okay, that sounds right to me. Does anyone else have any other thoughts or observations on that? Okay, that's all I have, and I have a ton of notes in the margins of the agenda here that I can attempt to encapsulate into a memo and send out to everyone in a few days, so that we can all review it and then send it to the larger planning commission in time for our work session on the 8th. I spoke with Maxine yesterday about tomorrow, the regular meeting, which will have a presentation also by the land use committee about some of their work product. And then we're going to present on the 8th. And it may be that also on the 8th, the planning department, she'd been talking with Bruce and Rick about this. The planning department may have kind of a executive summary written up and present to us on the 8th that would include everything but this topic that we've just been talking about, just this missing middle thing, because we're presenting that on the 8th, and everything else the planning commission may be able to just vote yes, looks good on the 8th, and then all of it, including missing middle, will then go to the mayor and commission for their meeting at the start of November.
I haven't seen the final version of that, but I snuck a little bit in about the missing middle for future work on there.
Great.
Oh, okay. Yeah, based on our talk at the last meeting 2 weeks ago, it was pretty clear to Maxine and me that this missing middle piece, that we're hustling to get it done as best we can so that it can be included in the part that goes to the mayor and commission in November. But I'm sure that we'll talk a little bit tomorrow at the planning commission meeting about the work session agenda for the 8th. The other thing I wanted to flag for everyone that Maxine let me know, and you guys will see this in one of the memos that went out from them, is that they are, in looking at something else that was, in their jurisdiction, they came to the conclusion that our recommendation to not allow ADUs in RM1, they had sort of a contrary recommendation that just relates to something of theirs. And so I just wanted to flag that for everyone so that you can be prepared, like they're going to say what they're going to say, and it's in their memo, and just pay special attention to that, just so that we can say, like, either, yeah, we like your recommendation. Maybe we'll change our ADU memo a bit, or here's the reasons. And they're very acutely aware of the affordability issues. And I think their idea is that to allow ADUs in RM1, but only on owner occupied parcels would kind of be a better approach, because it would tend to limit the student housing developers from coming in, but still open up the wonderful benefits of ADUs to people who live in those RM1 neighborhoods in single family homes. So anyway, just it's going to be a topic of conversation. It may take just a couple minutes, or maybe we'll get into a deeper discussion on it. But it's just something that I saw that's going to be in their presentation tomorrow. Well, all right. Thanks, everyone. Sorry to keep you over by 24 minutes, but great meeting. I think we got a ton of stuff done. Yeah, Jeff.
I just wanted to take 10 seconds to say, in my 9+ years on the Planning Commission, this little bit of work we've done seems like it has the most long-range effect to do something really cool for the whole community. So I want to thank everybody for their hard work. This has been fun.
It really has been.
Yeah.
Can I say something that's hard? Just so you guys are aware of how this whole process is going to go, you guys need to continue to be advocates for all the work you've done so far and for the ideas that you're looking to go forward. Some things are out of our control, so I just want to throw that out there for you guys, because I think that's really important. I know I agree very much with Jeff. I've enjoyed this a lot, and you all have worked hard on it, so just want to throw that out there to you guys. I know you know it, but needed to be.
Yeah, thank you. And let me just take a moment to thank you, Mark, for all of your tremendous help that you've given us on this. We could not have done it truly without you.
No, I'm sorry. I was going to interrupt you before you had the last word, because you're the committee chair, but I was going to thank you, Matt, for running this committee in such a efficient and stellar way. I've been on a lot of committees over the years, and this is one of the one or two most effective I've ever been on. And I hope we can continue our work together. It's been great to work with Mark and Robin, because I feel like we've gotten a little more insight into how staff works and thinks, and how we as community advocates can work with them to do what we all really want to do. But Matt, great job chairing the committee.
Thank you.
Top tier cat herder.
Well, and the end is nigh, as Mark said, but it may not be quite as nigh as we think, because by all indications, we're going to send stuff to the mayor and commission and ask them for more homework. So we may get to continue our work in this committee going forward as well. And I hope so. It's been just a real pleasure working with all of you. And I think we've gotten a lot of great work done.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Good night.
See you tomorrow.
Yeah. Robin, can you call PIO? Really?